Rainbow Six Siege has evolved over the years to the point where the game back in its first few years was completely different to the Siege we know today. So in today's video, I'm going to be covering some of the forgotten mechanics lost to time as the game has been updated. Starting off with bolo leaning. Now, if you haven't played Siege since the beginning, you will likely have no idea what mechanic this is. Basically, bolo leaning was when you walked up to a doorway or a wall and spam lean so that your head would quickly peek out, giving you intel and the ability to fire at the enemy and then quickly lean back behind cover. This was effective because of the leaning speeds of the day being significantly faster, allowing a player to snap their head back and forth at severe speeds. And this mechanic is called bolo leaning because Bolo, a super popular YouTuber, popularized this in his early videos. Ubisoft clearly did not design leaning with this in mind. They were not anticipating players to spam lean to that degree, and they definitely did not expect them to use this to quick peek onto people. So as the mechanic became more and more widespread in higher ranks, Ubisoft decided they were going to get rid of it once and for all. They would do this in Year 3 Season 2 or Operation Parabellum by smoothing out the animations of leaning, making it significantly slower. This made it impossible to bolo lean and a lot harder to quick peek, which is why we have the Psycho peek we know today, because it was the replacement for bolo leaning after it got nerfed. The next mechanic was arguably even more dominant and was even easier to do. That mechanic being drop shotting. This mechanic is not exclusive to Siege. Games like Call of Duty and other arcade shooters are likely more well known for this. However, just in case you haven't heard of drop shotting before, this mechanic is basically where you in the middle of a gunfight prone so that your head and body drop down significantly, which makes it harder for your opponent to hit you. This was especially effective in earlier versions of Siege because, like everything else, the prone animation was a lot more fluid and fast, and you could stay ADS during the prone animation, which allowed you to go from standing to prone and back again extremely fast, and it allowed you to still take gunfights while in the middle of proning. This was especially frustrating to go against because an enemy could be sprinting straight down a hallway, you could catch them off guard, but because they hit their prone key, they could win the gunfight. Ubisoft knew this was unhealthy for the game because it promoted aggression and allowed players to get out of situations they wouldn't have otherwise. So in Operation Parabellum, once again, Ubisoft would force players to un-ADS when they went prone. This made it basically impossible to pull off a drop shot, and it basically killed the mechanic altogether. Drop shotting can be used in niche extreme cases by using your hipfire, but you are a lot less accurate. So Ubisoft basically accomplished their goal. The idea of crouch spamming is also something that is not new to those of you who have played FPS games before. This is a very common strategy to throw your enemy's aim off in hopes of being able to have the upper hand. The way it works is you spam your crouch key repeatedly in a gunfight to lower and raise your head. This makes it harder for enemies to consistently hit your head, which in a game with one-shot headshot can be a big deal. This was a viable strategy because the animation being faster allowed for you to switch from standing to crouch height and then back again at extreme pace. However, once again, Ubisoft were not happy with this mechanic. They felt it did not fit the game's intended tactical pace, and so in Operation Burr Horizon, they would make the animation length of crouching significantly longer. This basically killed the strategy, and it's what causes crouching to be what it is today, where spamming it just results in your crouches getting averaged and you just end up in the same position. A lot of players still crouch spam out of habit, but it's really not useful. Now, another really common strategy that was done in the early days of Siege was resetting. This mechanic involved players, when their teammates were below 50 HP, intentionally downing them to revive them back up to 50 HP. This mechanic was possible because in the early days of Siege, reviving someone would bring them up to 50 HP instead of 20 like it is today. So a player could shoot his teammate that was below 50 HP with his pistol and then revive them to give them additional HP, which was extremely common and useful when you did not have a healing operator on your team. There was a little risk involved since you could accidentally kill them if you shot them too much, but as long as you used your pistol, the chance of that were pretty low. I think you can obviously see how this mechanic is a little flawed though. Being able to down your teammate and then get rewarded for it was really not good game design, and this was another mechanic that Ubisoft felt violated their philosophy for Siege, so they would remove it by making revived players only have 20 HP. This change, like many others in this video, was released in Operation Burr Horizon, since the season seemed to be when Ubisoft really wanted to tackle the base game mechanics they had gripes with. This obviously killed the mechanic, but it would also have side effects of making going down a lot more devastating, since you would now be one shot instead of two shot like before. Now, one of the only mechanics in this video that many of you will not look back on fondly was bullet holes. Back in the old days of Siege, shooting into walls, barricades, and other soft surfaces would leave holes in the wall like they do today. However, the major difference was that these holes went all the way through the wall, meaning that players could see through them from the other side of the wall, and it also allowed players to shoot through them without taking a damage reduction for penetrating the wall. And since bullet holes from a distance were basically impossible to see, it made for situations that that were extremely unfair, where you could just die instantly to someone you couldn't even see. Ubisoft, rightfully so, said this was a problem. However, the solution was going to be complicated and would take some time to develop, so it wouldn't get released until Operation Crimson Heist, when it was finally introduced to the game. And the change they decided to go for was removing a player's ability to see through the bullet holes. They would instead, when you shot a wall, make a slight indentation in the wall that did not go all the way through. It would take multiple repetitive shots to make a hole in a wall, and this hole would be much larger and more obvious to other players. So the mechanic was basically removed entirely. The entire community was happy, and no one ever really complained about this going forward, because bullet holes were just that hated. Another thing that players found really annoying back a long time ago was ratting. This is a pretty self-explanatory mechanic. Basically, players would hide in a corner of a map under an object or behind one and wait for enemies to walk by. And this was typically done under the fence since the attack was entering the building, and a lot of time they'd miss-drone someone. Now, this is not anything new. Some players even do it today. However, what made ratting such a strong strategy specifically back in the older days of Siege was two aspects. Firstly, the lighting of old Siege was extraordinarily dark to fit a more realistic vibe, so there were a lot of extremely dark corners. This allowed for players to hide under desks or in tight corners and basically be unseeable. But the second reason this was possible is because there was no rim lighting in this area of Siege. So, players could very easily hide and go unnoticed since there was nothing to make them stand out from the environment. And with most default uniforms being mostly black, I'm sure you can see why hiding in a dark area could be easily accomplished. Because of this, Ubisoft would update the lighting multiple times throughout the seasons of the game being out, the most significant of which would come in Operation Wind Bastion. And these lighting changes would make the game's lighting much more consistent. This made the game way more competitively sound and helped to remove ratting as a possibility for players. But they would also add in rim lighting in Operation Crystal Guard to fully kill this problem. And the issue of operators blending into the background was basically completely gone. Now, runouts is another mechanic that is definitely still available today. However, this mechanic has been nerfed and changed significantly since the game's release. But just in case you don't know what a runout is, it's basically when a defending player who is designed to stay indoors runs outside to take a gunfight on the attackers. This can be useful when an attacker is droning or on rappel since they are vulnerable. But where this changed from old Siege to now is in the amount of time allotted. In the current Siege, you only have 1 second before you are spotted outside. However, in the old Siege, you had 2 seconds before being detected. This may not seem like a big difference, but it was. It allowed you to reach much farther places and catch attackers off guard in scenarios that you can't in the current game. Also, in the older days of Siege, games were not originally designed with spawn peaks and runouts in mind, because many of them were created by players later in the game's life. So, Ubisoft would begin addressing most of those spawn peaks and runouts over the course of the game's map reworks, which would once again worsen the player's ability to run out. They would even lower the detonation time for claymores, which would further hurt runouts. Today, a player can only really sprint a few meters out of a doorway or vault out of a window before being spotted, so the mechanic's effects are a lot less drastic than they were before. A more recent mechanic that was removed entirely from Siege that was met with controversy amongst the community was reload canceling. Reload canceling was a mechanic for most of Siege's lifespan. Basically, the mechanic is as it sounds. In the middle of a reload, you could cancel the animation and get back into the fight. And canceling this animation would leave you with whatever ammo you had left before reloading. This allowed you to still kill enemies even when they caught you off guard and punished you. Many players considered this to be unfair because you could outsmart someone by swinging them while they were reloading, and they could hit a lucky hipfire headshot and still kill you. Not to mention the fact that just canceling a reload in the first place is unfair because it allows you to potentially ADS on someone and get a kill as well. And that's why Ubisoft decided it was something that they wanted to remove. So in Operation Commanding Force, they would make reload function completely differently. Now, when you started a reload animation and the magazine was removed from your gun, you only had 1 bullet in the chamber. This meant that if you were in the middle of a reload, you could cancel it, but you would only have 1 bullet to defend yourself. This basically made reload canceling unimportant now, and many players resorted to switching to their secondaries in times like this. It was a welcome change, but it was definitely another mechanic that was lost to time. Anyways, that wraps up today's video. Hopefully you enjoyed me covering some of the Siege mechanics that were lost to time over the game's updates. If you feel like I forgot some of them, let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed today's video, I make Siege content just like this twice a week, so go subscribe to the channel and follow me on Twitter if you don't want to miss the next upload. If you want to watch another video just like this one, a video will be popping up on your screen right now that I'm sure you all enjoy. I'll see you next time, friends, and peace.